Today, we're going over my thoughts of ranged DPS in the 9.2 raid for WoW. Before we begin, I would just like to say that about 97% of my viewers aren't subscribed, so if you're watching this video and you aren't subscribed, please consider hitting the subscribe button. It really helps me out. Also, hit the like button if you know the content. And lastly, if you see some of my videos and think you are subscribed, just double check just to make sure. Sometimes YouTube recommends a lot of stuff and you're not subscribed even though you think you are. So thank you and enjoy the video. Alright, so we're continuing the DPS tier list today. We're doing raid ranged DPS, and again, before we begin, I'd just like to say that this is going to be not a world first race thing. It's just kind of just, you know, mythic raid level. Everybody has 4-piece and their double legendaries and just how everything compares to each other. I like to separate ranged and melee because they, in my opinion, they serve different roles in raids and in most content. And everything, if you want to play anything in this, you can, and you 100% can and will get CE on any single one of these classes. I'm just doing this to kind of show what's good relative to each other. Now, that being said, this video is going to be a little bit different than the melee one in the fact that while I think that there's a lot of good range specs, I think that none of the range specs are better than the best melee specs in the game. So if I was doing this big double tier list of every DPS, I don't think any range would be S tier. I think that's just really the best way to put this. But because I'm splitting them up, you'll see some ranged on S tier because they are better than a lot of the other ranged. That doesn't necessarily mean they're like the best class in the game, but that's just how I'm doing my tier list and comparing. So we're gonna start off with Affliction. Affliction's going to D. I believe Affliction is by far the worst range spec in the game for raid. So they've kind of just been paying for their dominance in from Castle and Athria still. So their tier set doesn't really do much. Which is kind of one of the first problems. 2-piece makes Malefic Raptor damage increase by 15%, and you extend your Corruption, Agony, and Unstable Affliction by 2 seconds. Maybe do that. Now, while this seems cool and lets you get off more casts of Malefic Rapture, basically all it's doing is unnerving the damage that it got nerfed by, I think, in 9.1. So that doesn't do a lot. And then the 4 set is while all your dots are active, so Agony, Corruption, and Unstable Affliction, your Drain Soul has a 10% chance, and Shadow has a 20% chance to make your next Rapture cost no soul shards and cast instantly. Which isn't this tier set together isn't that big of a damage increase, and it doesn't really help out Affliction, where they kind of bring some of the lowest just damage overall. Sorry, I heard something at my door. Anyway, yeah, it brings kind of the lowest damage overall in like the entire raid, and you're not really going to kind of fill the niche that Affliction is good at here, where it's like the big multi-dotting, the big multi-target cleave. The only thing where that could potentially be in play is Pantheon, but I think in Pantheon you're going to get better value out of Destro or Demo. So I don't think Affliction really feels a good niche in this raid, and it kind of just brings low damage. It brings good Warlock utility, but if Warlocks can just swap the other 2 specs, so I'm not super high on Aff. Arcane I'm going to put it in B. Now, if you were ranking like class wise, not spec wise, I think mages are almost S tier. Like all 3 of them put together. Individually, I don't think any one of the specs are S tier, but I think each one brings like different values, and I think that like if you're a 100% performance oriented player, I think that generally you'll find really good performance by swapping between each mage spec based on the encounter. So Arcane's thing is kind of just this bursty single target damage. It has the lowest sustained damage of the 3 of Fire, Frost, and Arcane. But if that like big burst every, I think it's every minute or minute and a half, is something that you need, then Arcane is going to be really good on those kind of fights. And their tier set kind of just leans into this more. So 2 pieces increases your Arcane damage dealt to enemies affected by Touch of the Magi by 10%, and 4 pieces Touch of the Magi's duration increased by 4 seconds, and you get 25% mana regen for 12 whenever you cast it. So this kind of lends it more into its big oomph burst window with the Kyrian Amp, with their legendary power that increases the damage of their Arcane Barrage. So I think Arcane's fairly good. I don't think the single target is as valuable as what Fire or Frost can do right now, especially since it has less defensive capability than the other 2, because it only has 1 immunity, and it doesn't have the double cheat that Fire has because it's Kyrian, But it brings down Frost. It brings mage utility, which is always good, and I think overall it's going to be good if you need that like big burst oomph of damage. Next, Beast Mastery. I'm gonna put Beast Mastery in C. I could see this moving up to B. The big issue right now is that they're like a single target specialist, and they do a fair bit of single target damage compared to some of the other specs here. I think you're going to see a lot of Beast Mastery simply because it's one of the most popular specs out there, but I don't think it's going to be necessarily be the best. Again, their AoE is lacking, and their tier set doesn't really fix this. Now, I'm recording this on the February 26th, and yesterday Blizzard put out a blue post saying that they've heard that the AoE doesn't really do much, and they're looking to kind of update the tier set in some kind of AoE way. As I'm recording this, I don't know what that will be, and I don't know how much that will change it. But with the current knowledge of their tier set, which is 2-piece, your kill command crits crit chance is increased by 15% for each stack of frenzy your pet has. So if you're doing good gameplay, which you should be, and you have 3 stacks, that's 45% increased crit chance. And then the 4 set is the kill command crit increase the damage cooldown reduction of your next Cobra shot by 40%. The cooldown reduction is fairly useless on that, but the damage is a pretty good increase, especially if you're running Killer Cobra. So you just kind of do this thing of kill command Cobra shot, and it leads to a pretty big damage like burst in your cooldowns. However, I don't think they bring any like useful cleave or AoE outside of that, which is why I'm giving them such a low rating. If their tier set does give them good AoE, I think they can move up into B tier fairly reasonably. The thing that's stopping them from being up in A or S is I don't believe that they bring enough unique utility outside of Lust, but everybody brings Lust these days. Or they don't excel at a certain damage profile. They don't have the highest single target. They don't have the best cleave. They don't have the best 2 to 5 target, or all of that. But I think overall that if the AoE tier set benefit changes, like help it out, I think it can move up. Next we're going to go Boomy. Now, if Boomy was on like an all-around every spec list, I think it would be A. But because we're doing range, I think Boomy is an S. I think Boomy is one of the better range specs that you could pick. Its cleave is in like big spread out AoE, which will always be kind of a thing that happens in raids. It happens on a bunch of fights in the raid. It happens on stuff in Pantheon. It happens in Lahuvium. It happens in Anduin. I believe there's some that will happen on the Jailer. I'm not 100% certain on that. So there's a lot of fights where you can get good Starfall usage. And it also brings really good single target with Ventir, and it can bring really good kind of off healing / burst single target with Night Fae. With the nerfs to Ventir, they're both kind of in line now, and you'll end up kind of swapping between the two depending on the fight, what you need or what your raid needs. They also are essentially unkillable, right? Like they get the big armor, they have bear form, they have the conduit that all the druids run, which heals them whenever they drop below a certain health threshold. They have bark skin. Boomies are fairly unkillable. They can help off heal in your raid if needed, which I don't know. Like you might need that in certain scenarios, but it's kind of a minor thing. They also bring Roar, they bring a Rebirth, they bring, the name is escaping me, Innervate, there it is. So they have really good utility, really good damage, and then their tier set, 2-piece entering Lunar Eclipse creates a Fury Balloon at 25% effectiveness that follows your current target. So that gives you a bunch of Astral Power from it. And the 4 set, while you're in Eclipse, the cost of Star Surge and Starfall is reduced by 20%. That's just, more damage from being able to cast your spells more often. That plays with Pulsar in a really interesting way because the reduce, like your things cost less, but Pulsar tracks it as if the full value is spent. So let's say Star Surge costs 24 AP, but your Legendary tracks it as 30. So you kind of can cycle through and get a lot of benefit from the 2 set this way. But overall, I think that Boomy fills a really useful niche, and it does well in that niche. It's fairly unkillable. It brings really good utility. So I think for that, Boomy is probably one of the better raid DPS range specs. Next is the other really good one, and it is going to be Demo. I believe Demo is kind of just one of, if not the best range spec this tier. And it's by far the best Warlock spec. It brings all your useful like Warlock stuff with your Gateway, Summons, and Health Stones, which are incredibly important for raids. They have a really, really strong single target, like 1 minute burst window. As well, you can kind of amp this if you're getting really degenerate by giving them like health amps with like Blood Death Knight or Warrior Rallying Cry. They also get a lot of value off of stamina for more gear, so they scale fairly well into like the later parts of the tier. And they're fairly mobile with all their procs they have, and they're also just kind of cool seeing a bunch of imps. Now, their tier set is pretty good. I think 2-piece is better than the 4-piece, but the 2-piece called Dreadstalker is a 100% chance to summon an additional one, so you get 3 instead of 2, which feeds into your 1 minute burst window even more from Tyrant. And then 4 set, your Hand of Gul'dan has a 15% chance per Shoal Sard to summon a malicious imp, so generally you're going to cast that with 3, so it'd be 45%. An imp is the malicious imp is kind of a fancier version of an imp, and when it's slain, it deals either 85% of spell power, fire damage to all nearby enemies of implosion, or to your current target. So that kind of gives it a little bit of AoE cleave, as well as like a lot of single target. I think Demonology is also like fairly unkillable, and has like really good damage profiles for what's going to happen in the raid. Like they have a really good defensive toolkit with like wall, with the health shield talent they can get, and they just have a passive 20% DR because of Soul Link or whatever it's called with their pet. So they're incredibly durable. They do really good burst damage on a really short cooldown, which is very valuable for raids, especially for target swapping. Their tier set's good and valuable, and they bring really good utility. So that's an easy S tier for me. Next, we are doing Destruction. Now, Destruction I'm torn on. Destruction, I think you could argue, is either C or A, depending on the fight. Essentially, if the fight itself is like has fairly good AoE, like Anduin downstairs is really useful. Zymox, Pantheon at the last stage, I guess the first boss, but the first boss is kind of a joke. Then Destro can get really good value from its like Rain of Fire and its Infernal and all that. If it's on single target, I think Destro's generally worse than a lot of other options, and we'll put it down here. So I think because of those two things, we're going to average it out and put it in B tier. Destro's tier set is probably one of the better ones in the game. The 2-piece every 10 soul shards spent grants Ritual of Ruin, which makes your next Chaos Bolt or Rain of Fire consume no soul shards and have no cast time. And then the 4th set, whenever Chaos Bolt or Rain of Fire consumes a charge of Ritual of Ruin, you summon a Blasphemy for 8 seconds. So Blasphemy is basically just a purple Infernal. The reason it's purple is so that you can kind of track the difference between the two. And it does grant you Rain of Chaos, which can summon more Infernals. And then likewise, if you proc this multiple times, so if your Blasphemy is already out, and you spend another 10 soul shards, you get another free one. You extend the duration and you deal impact damage as if the Infernal kind of landed. So even overcapping it, that's not that bad. The reason I'm putting them down in B, like I said, is that they either bring really good kind of AoE or like kind of low single target, kind of like slightly below average, like not as good as some other options. So I think when you average those out across all the fights, they'll be in B tier. I think you're going to swap to them on certain fights in certain cases if you need that while you're playing a warlock. I think generally Demonology is better, but Destro kind of brings all the same warlock stuff as well as kind of a stronger AoE niche. Next is Elemental. So Elemental is interesting. Elemental I'm going to put either at the bottom of A or the top of B, and just to spice things up, we're going to put it at the top of B. The reason for this is honestly because of their kind of spicy new build that came out over the past few days with Machine Gun Shaman, where you generally just kind of blast Lightning Bolt as much as possible because your tier set lets you kind of have 100% uptime of Storm Elemental, and you get so many charges of like the Wind Burst thing that makes Lightning Bolt cast faster. This leads to like a really strong single target build that's actually fairly immobile. As well as like really good cleave and AoE because Chain Lightning also gets buffed by this. Because of this, I think their damage profiles are really good. The issue with that is that if like we were ranking things from like a pure DPS profile, I think they'd be higher. But they don't have any raid utility outside of Lust or the weird niche scenarios where Reincarnate could be useful, which I don't think there's a lot of cheese you can do in this raid with it. I could be wrong, I haven't looked a lot into it, but I think generally that's like not going to be a huge raid thing. Also, they're super squishy. 100% elemental uptime means they can't use their best defensive in Earth Elemental, which means that they lose a lot of defensive value. If this was somehow patched, I think I'd put them up in A tier because they bring really valuable damage, some of the highest single target damage in the game. But their utility is super low as well as their survivability, so I think I'm going to put them here. Next is Fire. So Fire goes in A tier. I'm also going to put Frost up in A tier, and we're going to talk about them kind of together because they're doing similar stuff. They just fill different niches. So Fire and Frost are kind of the two raid mage specs that I expect to see the most. Generally, when Fire has good damage, it's going to be almost always your best bet for progression. Its damage profile is just super useful. It has short CD burst as well as decent AoE and fairly good single target. And it's very versatile in what it can do with that with combustion. It also has 2 cheat deaths, so it has Cauterize, which it always has, and you run Dreamweaver, which gives it Pod Tender. The ability to kind of have 2 cheat deaths is super, super just good. Like, being able to mess up twice and not die is a very important factor for progression. It gets less value in farm, But just having the ability to kind of like that little double safety net in progression can let pulls live longer. It can let you learn mechanics better. It can be kind of a grace period if you mess up. You don't want to use those cheat deaths, but using them happens, and if you are, they're meant to be used. So it's good, I guess, if they proc and you would have died otherwise. Their tier set's nothing special. It got nerfed recently as well. 2-piece increases combustion by 2 seconds. Woo. 4-piece is while combustion is active. Fire Blast and Phoenix Flames recharge 30% faster. They used to be 100%, and it also used to burn you for percentage of your health, which is funny. But they got rid of that. So I think Fire brings really... Fire also has an immunity, and they also have all the mage stuff like Arcane, Affliction, and Lust, and Mobility, and whatever. I think Fire is going to be a really good single-target one. And then I think that Frost is your kind of 2-target cleave, kind of low-count AoE, maybe high-count AoE, it depends, raid thing. Where they lack in the cheat deaths. I'm not sure if you're going to play Venthyr, Necrolord, or Night Fae in raid. It's kind of up in the air. But they do have 2 ice blocks, which can also be very valuable if soaking mechanics are a thing. They're also unkillable. They also have amazing movement. They also have great utility. But they bring more of that kind of 2-target to low-target cleave specialization, which Fire doesn't really excel at. So I think that's kind of really interesting in that the fact that each mage spec kind of brings its own niche, and the ability to swap between them all, especially with covenant swapping, kind of would make mage itself kind of an S tier class. But the specs themselves aren't anything like incredible, so they're not S tier, which I think is very interesting. Frost also brings funnel. I guess I should mention that, which can be valuable, which the other 3 don't have. Next, we're going on to Shadow. Now, Shadow, I think you can argue to be either B tier or C tier. I'm gonna put it B. The reason that I'm putting them there is that all they do is single target damage. Now, I think Shadow itself is going to be like the most kind of volatile of all my rankings here, because Shadow's kind of never a middle of the pack kind of thing. They're always either really good or really bad. I think right now they have more of a chance of just kind of being meh. If the nerfs that came out a few weeks ago didn't happen, I think Shadow is a really good spot and would probably be like an A or an S tier class, because they're just doing so much single target. But now they're just doing good single target. Their AoE is not very good. It's like fine right now. They have fairly good multi-dotting, which can be impactful in a few fights. And they bring priest buff, which is like fine. Besides Vampiric Embrace as well, they don't really bring a lot of raid utility, so I think B is fine. If anything, I think their tier set is the reason that they're able to like be this good, and the fact that the tier set was nerfed is kind of what brought them down. But if buffs do happen, I can see them go up. But I think B is fair. So the tier set, 2-piece, casting Devouring Plague, 40% chance to grant Dark Thoughts. Searing Nightmares, 25%. Dark Thoughts is just kind of the instant mind blast you get. And the 4th set is whenever you consume a Dark Thought, you animate your shadow behind you, which deals like a bunch of damage over 6 seconds to all enemies within 10 yards of your target, including your target. So it's kind of like an AoE kind of damage thing as well as some single target. I'm curious to see where Shadow ends up in my final rankings list, like after the tier and everything. I could see it going down, I could see it going up, but I think right in the middle, kind of a fair hedge for Shadow, especially since its niche is single target. It fills that niche fairly well, but not as well as some other specs, and its AoE is kind of okay, but it lacks utility and it lacks kind of defensives that other things have. And last but not least is Marksmanship Hunter. I'm going to put them in C, but this is with kind of an asterisk around it. I think that Marksmanship has a lot of chance of moving up depending on what bug fixes come to its tier set. Because right now, their tier set is super buggy. Like, it's really messed up. And it's kind of hard to be able to figure out, like, where they're supposed to be in terms of damage. You know what I mean? Oh, sorry. It's kind of hard to figure out where they're supposed to be in terms of damage because of the fact that their tier set is so buggy. So the tier set is 2-set trick shots, also increases damage with the effective shot by 30%, which you'd think doesn't really have any impact in single target. But the 4-piece is that every 40 focus you get 1 charge of trick shots. So this gives them the ability to passively do AoE as well as passively do 2-target cleave, which they literally had never had the ability to do before. And it makes volley even stronger because it also gives you trick shots, right? So I think these things can lead to it being kind of a B tier spec and like a low 2 to 5 target cleave as well as burst AoE, which is valuable, and there are fights where this will be important. I think Lords of Dread, you could see it because of the 2-target cleave, and when you can see it because of the burst AoE you need. Maybe Jailer, depends. I think Jailer is more of a single target fight, kind of similar to the last boss of Legion, but we'll see how that turns out. But because of these bugs, it's hard to really tell how much damage they can deal. So right now, I think their damage is fairly low in C tier. But if the bugs get fixed, I think I could see them moving up into B. So there you go. Those are my thoughts on ranged DPS for raid. I think overall that melee are generally going to be a little bit better this tier, but I think there are some good range specs that can shine. And I could see this list moving a fair bit towards the end of the raid. But yeah, let me know what you think. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.